Um, okay, so you've got you're managing the waiting room now, Ariana and
Yes,
George.
I am.
Yeah, great, thank you. All right, so let us make a start. Good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Nick Rose. I'm the Executive Director of Sustain the Australian Food Network, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this second webinar in our series featuring the achievements and lessons of the first 10 years of the Vermont Farm to Plate Plan and Network. Today's webinar is titled Planning for Sustainable Farming and Healthy Food Access. We are delighted to be sharing a very full program with you over the next 2 hours, featuring first Sarah Danley, Network Manager for Vermont Farm to Plate, then Melanie Chisholm, Manager Healthy Eating at Vic Health, and Dr. Stephanie Godrich, Lecturer at Edith Cowan University. We'll then have 15 minutes for questions, and the second part of the webinar will take the form of 6 concurrent workshops organised by state in breakout rooms with many presentations by several local experts, followed by discussion on opportunities for collaboration and joint working in each state and region. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge on behalf of the board and staff of Sustain that I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation. We respectfully acknowledge the custodianship of the elders, recognising that they and their ancestors stewarded these lands and their diverse creatures sustainably for tens of thousands of years. We acknowledge that sovereignty over these lands was never ceded, and that the process of historical truth-telling that will and must lead to justice for all First Nations peoples on the basis of a duly negotiated treaty is an urgent task for all Australians. I'd also like to acknowledge any First Nations persons who may be with us today or watching this event subsequently. I'd also like to acknowledge that this series of webinars has been made possible by the generous support and collaboration of a wide range of partners across the country. They are too numerous to name individually, however you can see all their logos now on the screen. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to all members of Sustain who are with us today. Your support means a great deal to us and we are very thankful for it. Sustain is a national sustainable food systems organisation and a registered health promotion charity. Our mission is to design and build better food systems, reducing the burden of chronic dietary related ill health through collaborative, long-term and coordinated projects and initiatives. As I mentioned last week at our first webinar, we have long been inspired by the work of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund in the development and implementation of the Farm to Plate Plan. And I'm sure that anyone who attended last week's webinar would likewise have been greatly impressed by the scope and depth of this work as presented by Program Director Jake Claro. This morning, we are very fortunate to be joined by Farm to Plate Network Manager Sarah Danley, who will provide us with an overview of the Farm to Plate planning work, including agricultural land preservation, food access and economic development, with a particular emphasis on the partnerships and coalition building that has made this work possible. As the network manager since 2017, Sarah provides support to several Farm to Plate network groups and other projects, including tracking of goals and indicators for the Farm to Plate food system plan. She previously worked at the Centre for Agriculture and Food Systems at Vermont Law School as a program officer, a role that combined project management with research and creation of legal resources. Prior to moving to Vermont, Sarah lived in Boston, where she held positions at farmers markets and in environmental outreach. She holds a Master of Environmental Law and Policy from Vermont Law School and a Bachelor of Arts in Community Health and Architectural Studies from Tufts University. Sarah also has a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, where she took practical courses in design, but developed a passion for ceramics and jewellery. She lives on a sheep farm in South Royalton and spends her free time gardening, hiking with her dog and watching the sheep. So a very warm welcome to you, Sarah. Thanks very much for joining us, and we are keenly anticipating what you have to share with us.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I will pull up the presentation. Is that showing correctly? Sorry, is the presentation working?
Yep, that's all good.
Yes.
Thanks, Sarah.
Sorry, okay, there's the chat window. Great, thanks everyone. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for the warm welcome. Sorry, even though we tested this, this is giving me a little bit of a hard time at the moment. Let me just stop this. Sorry about that. All right, how's that?
All good. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, so I am going to talk about a pretty broad range of interrelated subjects about farm to plates, food access, farmland preservation, and local planning work. So farmland access and food access are two of our statewide network groups, but both of those groups have increasingly taken on project work in the form of helping communities address these challenges at the community level through a local planning process. So what I'm going to take us through is a little bit of context about Vermont, very briefly, the trajectory of farm to place work across this broad spectrum of food access, farmland access, and local planning. Make sure we touch on some examples from communities that are happening currently in Vermont, and briefly give some key takeaways and remaining challenges. So for some context on Vermont, this is the ancestral and unceded land of the Western Abenaki. These are the still currently extant tribes and their traditional tribal boundaries. And later on, I will be talking about a project that we're doing with the Nulhegan up in northeastern Vermont. Vermont is a population of under 630,000. There's 255 municipalities. Only 9 of those are actually incorporated as cities. 18.4% of the population lives in a city, which with the rest of the population leaves an average of just over 2,000 residents per town. So as you can imagine, most local government is non-expert volunteers. And this is just for reference, this is actually the town I live in. This is roughly what our communities look like. This is a rough average size community, just over that 2,000 average. So in terms of the planning infrastructure, I didn't want to get too much into the logistics because I'm sure it's probably different there, but just for some helpful context. So the Farm to Plate plan is a statewide strategic plan, but it's not tied to any geography or designed to be a roadmap for communities to implement. So the planning community in Vermont doesn't look to the Farm to Plate strategic plan as a plan in the traditional sense. What we do have for traditional planning is at the state level, we have Act 250 development regulations. So this is really strong statewide regulations that developments above a certain size must meet a number of criteria, including mitigation of impact to primary agricultural soils and compliance with regional and municipal plans. We then have a middle layer of regional planning commissions, and each regional planning commission has a regional plan that has to include a number of elements that I'll get into a little bit more. And the teeth that these regional plans have is that any development big enough to trigger the state level regulations has to be in compliance with the regional plan. Then moving down to that municipal level, towns are supposed to have comprehensive plans. They're not strictly required to, but they're encouraged to with a lot of incentives. And they must have the same elements of the regional plan and be in compliance with the regional plan. So and then also any development that triggers the statewide regulations will also have to be in compliance with the town plan. And then of course there's local ordinance as well. So sorry for starting out with something as dry as that regulatory structure, but I thought it was important context for this content. So when we look at regional and municipal planning in Vermont, these are the required elements that have to be included for it to be considered an approved plan. You'll note it says statement of objectives, a land use plan, transportation plan, utilities and facilities, natural, scenic, and historic resources, education plan, recommendation for implementation in relationship with other plans, energy, housing, economic development, and flood resilience. These ones I've highlighted here are areas where Vermont communities traditionally already talk about food systems and food access. I'd say every community in Vermont is already thinking about agricultural land preservation in its land use plan and map. Many of them are also addressing it as preservation of natural resources, and a decent number actually include agriculture as part of their economic development section. That said, we felt like the work, it was touched on in a very superficial and not consistent manner. So Farm to Plate, as I mentioned, has been dedicating significant time in its farmland access topic and its food access topic to helping do planning at the regional and local level. Obviously, as a collective impact network, there's many organizational partners that I'll try to acknowledge throughout the presentation, but I did want to acknowledge these two in particular because they are precursors to this work. The Northeastern Vermont Development Association has a regional food system plan that was in existence before Farm to Plate began this work, and they've been a key partner through this development all along the process. The Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission has a regional food system assessment that serves as a model for community food assessments and also has been a partner throughout this whole process. So the Farm to Plate network's involvement in the land use planning topic really did start with the agricultural question. And back in 2016, we had a task force of our farmland access group create a series of agricultural land use planning modules. This photo is the first one, but there are 5 of them. So this first one talks about planning basics, planning process and who needs to be included, how to do a community food security assessment, and then introduces the topics that will be covered in more detail in later modules, which is land conservation, farmland and property taxes, local regulatory context, and state regulations. I'm not going to go into too much depth on this in part because I was not working at Farm to Plate yet during this. I can't promise I'll even be much help in answering any questions about it. That said, one of the big things that came out of this was the need for ag enterprise support. So through this process, there's a realization that there was a huge inconsistency in how municipalities treat on-farm accessory businesses, such as farm stores, agritourism activities, tasting rooms, etc. So this inconsistency was a real barrier for farms in some cases for actually creating these enterprises, but in many cases, even just the indecision about whether they would be allowed to or not put a damper on their efforts. So the local regulatory context module of this Farmland Access series identified this challenge and also found a new example in one of our towns where they had actually developed a new zoning category for on-farm ag enterprises. So in 2017, because this was still a challenge, Farm to Plate network members and other key stakeholders actually engaged and crafted a bill that was successfully passed that requires that no municipal land use bylaws can prohibit an accessory on-farm business as long as that business is regulated through the State Agency of Agriculture. So this was a huge victory for our farms, especially our agritourism farms, and a lot of our direct-to-consumer sales, which I'll touch back on later. So moving on from that, the members of our Farmland Access Group were actually really interested in expanding this concept to also talk more directly about food access and food security. There was a feeling that these original modules, although they certainly talked about food access as part of a holistic food system, didn't go deeply enough into that topic. We also felt like there was a gap in the available literature nationwide on assistance for rural communities to tackle this topic, and especially for rural communities where it might be really hard to pass an ordinance and it might be better to include community actions in a comprehensive plan. So in 2017, we began creating this new module on local planning for food access, a toolkit for Vermont's communities. It was led by a woman who had previously worked at one of the regional planning commissions and by an organization called Hunger Free Vermont. So one of the biggest strengths of this project was the coalition building that involved. The creation of this resource ended up being a very large task force that included half of our regional planning commissions, 3 different state agencies, including Health, Ag, and Natural Resources, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, the Vermont Community Garden Network, at least 1 regional hospital, the Vermont Law School, University of Vermont, and many passionate community activists. So this coalition building, I think, is one of the most valuable pieces of this project because bringing all these people in the room together to talk about food system planning and the connections between agriculture and food system resiliency had real professional development effects that made an impact even beyond the creation of this actual guide. One example of that is around farmers markets. So we realized that a lot of the planning community who was dedicated to helping their communities talk about food access and local farmers, their main example for what to do was creating new farmers markets. At the same time, our agricultural community was saying that in some areas of the state that was still necessary, but in other areas it was actually oversaturated, and the creation of new markets was splitting the customer base essentially and driving a lot of those markets out of business. So this was a really important conversation that we were able to have with all those stakeholders in the room. Another example that I really was fond of is the topic of wild food. So this was actually one of our planning partners who raised this to us. And it was just really fun and eye-opening to have this group of stakeholders talking about wild foods and how communities can support access to foraging, hunting, fishing, etc. So as we were developing this module and planning our future work with communities on the ground, one of our biggest questions was, where does this topic of food access fall in Vermont's planning and regulatory structure? Again, here on the right is those categories again, and there was no real clear place where food access fit. One of the options that came up is that one of the regional planning commissions we were working with had already formed a partnership with a medical center and created a health and wellness plan template. So they were already going to the municipalities in their region, encouraging them to voluntarily add this new section on health and wellness, which was not required. So we ended up partnering with them, and our focus in that region was including food as part of the health and wellness plan rather than as including food as a separate topic. Another sort of wrinkle in our question of where to fit it was that as we were identifying strategies that communities could undertake, we identified strategies that fell into all these buckets. So certainly the three that communities had already been using, but also transportation, utilities and facilities, housing, education. So originally we had actually structured the plan or structured this resource trying to encourage communities to create a food system plan. That was our goal. We realized that that was unlikely to be realistic in all communities, but we sort of held it up as the gold standard and then said, if you aren't able to do that, consider at least incorporating it in your existing plan. Throughout this process and through the coalitions that we built, we actually ended up changing our mind completely and ended up making a recommendation for communities to integrate food access, local agriculture, and food resiliency throughout their whole plan or through whichever sections make sense to them, rather than try to keep it separate. And there was a number of reasons for that. Some of the key benefits we identified was that we found that communities were more likely to actually implement the recommendations if they were incorporated through all the different sections rather than something else that could be forgotten on a shelf. We also found that there was a lot of value in communities looking at each of their existing sections of the plan through the lens of food access and local agriculture, because it would help them discover new ideas or identify barriers that were unintentionally restricting food access. So what we ended up actually creating for this toolkit for the communities to use is a guide on how different food access strategies could relate to different traditional planning topics. And I know this is probably hard to look at on a screen really quickly, but this basically is just a tool for us to be able to approach a community, and if they're working on a certain planning topic, we have this list of how they can incorporate food access in it. And conversely, if they have a specific project in mind, we can help them identify how it might relate to other topics that their community is already in support of. We also ended up finding that it was really important for communities to provide action steps in a variety of different categories, ranging from regulatory action, non-regulatory action that would still be implemented by the town, and community action that the government itself might not actually be involved in at all, but the community wanted to get it in its comprehensive plan. So we had done all of this work. We had begun presenting on it through some regional planning commissions, through some food system events, and we had planned a really robust round of outreach for this past summer, 2020. And we were planning to work directly with several communities to undergo a food systems planning process. And then COVID hit. So as in most places, we saw a huge increase in food insecurity. It went from roughly 1 in 10 to over 1 in 4. We also saw a huge increase in community interest in tackling food insecurity and in supporting local farms, which could have been a good sign for our outreach around this concept. But it was coupled with a real noticeable decrease in capacity for long-term planning. So that's at the town level. A lot of folks started focusing on immediate actions and had less time and capacity for the long-term strategizing. but that also applies to the partner level as well. A lot of our statewide food access organizations had to focus on immediate needs. On the other hand, there was also funding made available. So this past 6 months, we ended up pivoting to 2 projects instead of and as a complement to the proposed outreach work. The first is the Local Food in Your Community Grant Program. So this is a brand new grant program that was created this summer with funding that had been made available due to COVID and based on the work of the Farm to Plate Planning Task Force. The Vermont Agency of Agriculture and the Vermont Department of Health were able to pool funding. The funding from the Agency of Agriculture was funding that was meant for assisting specialty crop producers. And the funding from the Department of Health is funding for education and outreach around our federal nutrition incentives. So everything but the actual paying for food itself. So these 2 organizations were actually able to pool funding, create this new grant program, and we ended up awarding 15 different community projects all across the state, up to $5,000 each. And I'll talk a little bit more about those. The other piece we did is the Food Resiliency in Vermont storytelling website. So this website currently has about 16 profiles on it. We are adding more. And what we are really hearing from communities who wanted to start tackling food security and supporting their local farmers is that they all wanted to hear what other communities in the state were doing. In some cases, they had no idea what they wanted to do and they wanted a menu of options. In other cases, they knew exactly what they wanted to do and wanted to learn from existing examples. And in some cases, they actually just wanted support knowing that other communities were tackling the same thing as them. So I had a wonderful intern create this website over the summer. You should check it out. And that's in detailed 16 stories of community food access projects. I did want to briefly share a few of the ones that were funded by our grant program. The first one is the most traditional planning aid, which is a 4-town coalition actually was able to get funding to do a needs assessment on what types of support both farmers and consumers in the area needed. So that's just the result of the poll. So they were able to use this grant program to do the needs assessment and now actually have a graduate student who's going to be doing some business planning for them on how to actually address that need. The Chelsea grocery store is one of my favorites. So this is actually another one that came directly out of a long-term planning process. So Chelsea is a community near me, and for at least a year, I've been hearing stories about how they had a community engagement process and identified that they really needed a store downtown. And then COVID hit and a local farm in the area decided to commit its own staff time to help make this happen. And they were able to use this grant program to actually get the startup funding for the rest of the infrastructure for the store. So it came about through COVID, but it was filling a long-term need that had been identified by the community. Sweetland Farm, on-farm collaborative shop, was a farm who actually partnered with at least 10 different producers, I believe, to set up a collaborative farm store on their property. And I think this is a nice one because this is the exact type of project that was made possible through the Act 143 Ag Enterprise Regulation. They didn't have to worry about that at all. We also funded 6 farmers markets, which helped them adapt to the COVID regulations. And a variety of different community projects like Mission Farm, which is a group that started up on an existing farm, and they created a community garden, a food pickup site, a farmer's market, an outdoor classroom, and a shared kitchen, which I had to list here so I could remember all of the pieces. And finally, the Red Wagon Plants is a nursery business that used this grant to actually get a new greenhouse to expand their capacity growth for their wholesale markets. But one of my favorite pieces of this example is that their biggest wholesale customer is actually the Vermont Community Garden Network, who then provides those plants to community garden sites around the state. So it was really exciting to see how many different types of projects we were able to fund through this grant program. One other project that I wanted to touch on that was not through the grant program, but is a long-standing farm to plate project long in preparation and finally came to fruition this year is the Abenaki Land Link. So this is a project led by the Nulhegan Band of the Coosac Abenaki Nation, rooted in Vermont, which is a branch of Farm to Plate, and the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont. So it had been planned in process for several years and was launched this year, which was good timing. The Mohican Band provided seeds of a variety of different traditional Abenaki crops to growers around the state, ranging from large farms to backyard gardeners. The growers were able to keep whatever their own family would eat and return the rest of the food to Abenaki citizens. And this program, which was in its first pilot year, harvested nearly 600 pounds of food. And in the future, they plan to include a seed saving component, as well as using the relationships to provide access to the land for Abenaki citizens for hunting, gathering, etc. And I will just also note that this program is created separate from our local planning work, but many of our community projects with the communities we're talking to are participating as a land link site. There's been huge value in having a statewide project for communities to tap into as part of their project. Let's skip that one. So some work that we have upcoming, we are looking to figure out a way to continue the grant program. But whether or not the grant program continues, we're definitely going to continue relationships with the communities that we worked with. And we're going to sort of take this as our way into the door to then provide them technical assistance for the more long-term strategic planning. We have a number of transportation challenges in Vermont that we are going to need to address as a state, which will require some more state level thinking instead of just at the community level. One thing we're not going to be doing is advocating for a required element in town plans to talk about the food system. This is a question that a number of people have suggested to us. And every time it's been discussed, it's been decided it's actually more beneficial to encourage communities to work it into their existing plans. And another piece of that is that we know historically communities will push back if we add another required element, and we don't want this to be something they feel like they're forced into doing and go find a template and copy and paste it. We would rather work with them to incorporate it in ways that they find appropriate for their community. The state health improvement plan is sort of yet another type of planning process, and we have an ongoing project with a number of health stakeholders to incorporate food as medicine into the state health improvement plan, which I can talk more about if folks have questions on it. But I did just want to note that that really does closely relate to the Vermont Department of Health's involvement in this other community food planning work. Some of the bigger cultural questions that we're going to be working with are our planning partners have identified that there's a tendency in their fields to characterize farmland as open space. And this is really detrimental to having plans that actually provide economic development support to agricultural businesses. Act 143 did a lot to help that with on-farm infrastructure, but there is still a need to better incorporate the off-farm infrastructure that's necessary for these ag businesses. And we also are planning to help work on tackling the challenge of the tendency at the community level to think of food access as exclusively direct to consumer. We found in Vermont that a lot of towns understand that local farmers are a huge, or one of the best ways to support food access, but they're thinking in terms of just of direct to consumer instead of other market channels. I did want to take a second just to more directly acknowledge the key community partners. So we've had wonderful partnerships with a variety of different healthcare organizations in the state. So the statewide Department of Health, of course, was an amazing partner, especially in that grant program. The district offices have been involved in a lot of the community level work. Hospitals have been a valuable data source for the local planning projects. And then there's a number of other partners as well. The higher ed has been a key partner too, and I did mention them in the context of creating the module, but the other way we found them be really useful is by having students provide the assistance directly to communities. As in the case of the 4-town research study that's going to be having a business student develop a plan for them. And I also really quickly wanted to note public libraries as one that I didn't mention a specific example of earlier, but they've been a really great partner in community level work. So I am running out of time, so I was briefly going to go through some of my key takeaways and our remaining challenges. So obviously the food system is enormously complex, which can be really overwhelming to try and work with the community on, but it also presents an opportunity in that there's a huge variety of entry points depending on community interest. we've really come to a point of just working with the community on whichever piece of the food system resonates with them first, and then using that as an entry point to bring them into the larger planning system. There's also a lot of value in allying around interdisciplinary professional concepts, such as the social determinants of health for our health partners, smart growth, placemaking is an interesting one. The Vermont Department of Health funding that ended up being available because of COVID was actually originally earmarked for a placemaking project. Sorry, I don't know if it was the exact same funding, but they ended up in partnership with the Agency of Ag, originally meaning to do a placemaking project together that they focused on food systems because of COVID. I touched on the integrated rather than standalone when talking about food systems. Some remaining challenges is there's definitely severe logistical and funding difficulties of funding this intersectional work. So the merged funding streams for the grant program was successful and worth it. It was also a huge nightmare on the back end. There's also logistical funding difficulties for funding community work, especially with the really small grantees. There was a lot of extra administrative time for the relatively small amounts going out to communities. And finally, there's a real challenge and opportunity for Farm to Plate in the future of bringing together this statewide farm to plate food system plan with the community level, more geographic based planning. And I think a key piece of that is this need to develop systems for communicating best practices and state level knowledge to those communities. One of those solutions is one-on-one technical assistance, and we are planning to continue this work that does require a lot of time. Another option that we're working on is trying to make our new Farm to Plate plan as accessible as possible so that communities on the ground can use it to inform their own work. So this time around, instead of doing 40 to 60 page chapters, we've actually divided our content into 2-page topic briefs. We have 54 different briefs that are 2 or 4 pages. And we've actually been sharing out that information to communities when we work with them so that they can see how the issues in their own community might relate to the statewide, more theoretical Farm to Plate plan. And I did, just as my last thing, I did briefly want to mention a few other COVID adaptations that are related that we went through this summer. The Farm to Plate network did begin having weekly, and then we downgraded to bi-weekly and then monthly full network COVID-19 calls, which are really valuable for keeping all these pieces moving together. There was also a Vermont program called Everyone Eats, which was a state-funded program that paid restaurants to produce meals for the charitable food system. And the Vermont State Mill Jobs Fund also provided advising for meat processing facilities because we saw that as a real bottleneck in dealing with the pandemic shortages. And that is what I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Sarah. You've done an incredible job there covering such a huge swathe of work and collaborations, both over a decade of the Farm to Plate plan and your own time as the network manager, and then more recently, obviously in the last few months with the COVID pandemic, which is obviously of great interest and relevance for us here. And I've noticed there's a lot of questions. We are going to pick them up after we've heard from our 2 Australian speakers now, and have about 15 minutes for time for you to come back to those questions, and you can probably see some of those in the chat. So now it's my very great pleasure to welcome and introduce Mel Chisholm from Vic Health, and also I'll introduce Steph Godrich, who will follow her from Edith Cowan University. Mel is a qualified health professional and manager, having worked for over 15 years in the health sector. She's worked across a range of areas, including community organisations, NGOs and government, both here in Australia and in the UK, spending several years as a health commissioner in London. Steph is a nationally and internationally registered public health nutritionist with almost 15 years of practice experience. She also has experience in the university sector in statewide project coordination, research and lecturing positions, and has worked independently as a public health consultant to government and non-government organisations. So Mel is going to share with us some of the work that she and colleagues at Vic Health have been coordinating with the Food Systems and Food Security Working Group established in April this year, and then Steph will speak about some of her work supporting food security and healthy food access in WA. And just before Mel starts, can I please, a reminder to those who haven't done so yet, could you please rename your Zoom profile to put the state in front of your name, and for those in Victoria, can you please indicate whether you are metro or regional so we can finalise the breakout rooms. Thanks very much. Over to you, Mel. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick, and hello to everybody. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yep, all good. That's fantastic. So yeah, thanks for that introduction, Nick, and thanks very much for inviting me to present as part of this really exciting and timely webinar series. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathering and meeting today, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I extend that respect to any First Nations peoples that might be listening in today. I'd also like to give thanks to Sarah for that amazing presentation, and to Jake for his last week. We're so appreciative of the time you're giving up to support our journey here in Victoria and Australia towards a healthy and sustainable food system. So much great information. And for those of you listening in today who may not be aware of who the Victorian Health Promotion Foundation is, I thought a quick overview might be good. Vic Health is a pioneer in health promotion and has been around for over 30 years. We're an independent statutory authority with multi-partisan support, originally set up and funded via a hypothecated tax through the Tobacco Act in the 80s. We create and fund world-class interventions, we conduct vital research, we provide important seed funding, and advocate to all levels of government for policy change. Vic Health also has an important leadership role in convening key stakeholders to collaborate on health issues, and that's really the role I'm going to focus in on today. Vic Health is committed to 5 strategic imperatives, promoting healthy eating being one of those. And although we sit outside of government, these priorities do align with the Victorian Government's policy and program directions, and they are close partners in much of our work. So globally, attention is transitioning to a broader focus on nutrition, driven by the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. There's now a greater emphasis than ever that truly addressing nutrition involves thinking about all the different forms of malnutrition, including or highlighting the value of double duty actions and the role of the food system more broadly as it pertains to impacts on health and beyond health. Over the past 2 decades, there's been a growing recognition of our fractured food system and the need to shift to food and farming practices that better protect human and ecological health. We know, as you do, there are perverse incentives within our modern food system that support the production and consumption of ultra-processed foods and contribute to rising obesity rates, associated nutrition-related diseases, and health inequities. As an industry, the food system contributes the highest proportion of carbon emissions and has contributed to ecosystem collapse. The true health, economic and planetary impacts of our food system are externalised, making unhealthy, intensely produced food both affordable and accessible. At Vic Health, we're focusing on 3 areas of work which are intertwined and have been influenced both by the global agenda and the umbrella of frameworks that have been developed recently, such as that from the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition earlier this year that we like to reference quite a lot. And whilst we've known for many years about the impacts and threats to the food system, the events of 2020 with the bushfire devastation and COVID-19 have exposed the underlying risks, vulnerabilities and inequities in our system in just a matter of weeks. Supply shocks, stockpiling and workforce shortages created disruptions to our food supply, leaving communities, and particularly our most vulnerable, without food or unable to afford food. We also saw more newly food insecure people emerging who didn't know where or how to access support. To better understand the impacts, Vic Health undertook a statewide survey during our first lockdown period, which found that more Victorians were experiencing food insecurity and worrying about having enough money to buy food, and that 1 in 4 Victorians reported relying on a restricted range of low-cost, unhealthy food because of financial concerns during the lockdown. So I guess
Mel,
it's similar.
sorry, Mel, just a sec. I'm not sure if you were wanting to, did you have slides that you were going through with this? Just because we're not...
I clicked forward. Did it not? You can't see?
No, I think we're just at your title slide still. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's no good. Sorry about that. I'm on slide 3 or 4 now.
Okay.
Can't see that.
Leah just kind of pointed. Oh yeah, I was kind of yeah. We're just at the moment we're just seeing your title slide. Yeah, it's in
Let me try again. It does
There
say
we go.
I'm paused. Is that right, Nick?
We're on the 3 focus areas now, the healthy and sustainable food systems.
Can you see
That's
that?
forward.
If I click forward again, it says I'm screen sharing. Hang on a second. Can you see the coronavirus one now?
No, it's still on the healthy eating priorities slide.
No, I'm not sure. When I, it says that my screen sharing is paused. Has somebody over there got control of it?
I have. You could try again. No one else is sharing their screen, so.
I'm just trying to share screen again. Sorry about that, everybody.
Thanks, Leah, for
Yeah,
for
thank you for
mentioning
picking
it.
that up. Let's try. What can you see now?
Same slide, the healthy eating priorities.
And then if I click through.
There we go. Coronavirus. Yep, got it now.
Fantastic. Oh, I'm so sorry, everybody. So I was just talking about some coronavirus stats from our Vic Health survey done during the first lockdown period. And I was just saying that, yeah, whilst crisis like coronavirus can expose the cracks in our complex systems, they can also reveal opportunities to strengthen them. There can be transformative moments when rapid responses to changing conditions point to innovative ways to leap forward. And we really saw plenty of examples of this in Victoria. So if I click, hopefully you can see that. So
Yep.
for Health, our response was to form the Victorian Food Systems and Food Security Working Group. We came together in April 2020 to help coordinate the food relief response and facilitate work across the sector. The working group consists of a diverse range of stakeholders from a range of sectors, including state and local government, community health, food relief, social enterprise, research and academia. Not quite as many as Vermont level, but I think we're getting there. Despite the diversity, we're connected by a common goal. How can we work together to drive food system change both right now and into the future to improve food access for thousands doing it tough? What are the opportunities to share information, skills and contacts to collectively improve outcomes? We met regularly and were overwhelmed by the knowledge, expertise and willingness from everybody around the table to work together to drive change, even some that were traditionally competitors in the sector. The passion, enthusiasm and commitment was clearly evident and continues to this day. It's interesting to note too that due to the Victorian lockdowns, we have never actually met in person and all meetings and discussions have occurred online. This has not deterred anybody at all though, and I think has actually in fact enabled better inclusion and outcomes, especially for regional partners who would find it difficult to attend meetings in person. So over the year, we've had some amazing outcomes and the group has been responsible for some amazing work. For example, new collaborations have been built both within and across sectors to address emerging issues with the sharing of expertise and resources. There's been exploration of the opportunities to strengthen our food system and discuss the cracks through croaky articles and others, and also a live interactive event as part of Vic Health's Life and Health Reimagined series. We've written joint advocacy letters to ministers regarding investing in regional food systems and farmers, just to name a few. And whilst, as I said, the group was initially focused on responding to acute food security needs, the working group has always had an eye to the future towards prioritising a better food system post-coronavirus. Perhaps like never before, we knew we had an opportunity to genuinely shape the way our food system looks and to rebuild a healthier, sustainable and food secure future. The working group members were keen to take on this challenge and the idea of developing a consensus statement was born. Whilst it's still in development, we're making great progress and the input and expertise of the group are terrific to be part of. Our consensus statement aims to create a collective vision, which is noted on the slide there, for a healthy and sustainable food system in Victoria, and will propose a suite of priority asks that the Victorian state and local government could implement to catalyse action towards this. The goal is really to have a document that we can all speak to collectively, despite our differing organisational agendas and needs. Something we can use to sing from the same hymn sheet, as they say, when engaging in advocacy and policy work. We know from the work in Vermont that collective voices from the ground up can make a real difference to legislation and policy, which we're taking inspiration from. The working group has also collectively developed and drafted 10 guiding principles to underpin the statement. The first 3 of these are noted on the slide, and you can see that the first is focused on a food system that commits to the human right to adequate food. The second talks to food sovereignty of Victoria's First Nations peoples, and the third to the values of inclusion and food democracy. Some of the other principles talk to a food system that strengthens the local and regional food economy, a food system that is fair for farmers and food system workers, and one that celebrates, preserves and revives traditional food practices in Victoria. After the vision and principles, the statement will at its core propose policy priorities across 10 to 12 food system domains, representing actions that, if implemented, would have the best chance of transitioning our food system to the healthy, regenerative and equitable one that we need. Policy priorities have been identified by the working group alongside consultation with a range of other key groups, such as VATCHO, VCOS and partners from the education sector. In prioritising the policy ask, consideration will be given to their importance, their timeliness, their potential impact and their cost effectiveness. Each policy ask will be supported with a clear rationale and best practice examples to keep it grounded in real life examples. The aim is to finalise and launch the statement in early 2021, and I'd really like to again thank the hardworking members of the group who are so generously contributing their time and expertise to building it. So to conclude, whilst it's been a tough year by anyone's measure, we do feel that coronavirus has provided us all with an opportunity to reset the food system in Victoria by placing health, equity and sustainability and resilience at the core of recovery. The Food Systems and Food Security Working Group are testament to this, in that we've come together as a group of very different organisations and have united with a single collective goal. A key lesson from Vermont is that we can't change the system alone, and my hope is that in a few years' time, we too can be reporting similar positive outcomes with more jobs, less food insecurity, and a healthy, more affordable and local food supply for all. Thanks very much. Sorry about the stuff up on the slides, everybody. And I'm also looking forward to next week's webinar, and Sustain and Nick, you've done a great job in bringing this to life. It's been amazing.
Thanks so much, Mel, and thank you very much. You covered so much territory in just over 10 minutes, and I can say as a member of that Food Systems and Food Security Working Group, it's been a really fabulous initiative to be part of. Really acknowledge the leadership of Vic Health, yourself and Kirsten and Holly and Jane and all your colleagues, Sandro, in stepping into that leadership role and bringing stakeholders together around the table. And I think we can see the fruits of that labour now with that that really great vision and principles and political asks. It's a very exciting process to be part of. So now I'm going to invite Steph to take us over to the other side of the continent and hear about what's happening over in the West. Steph, over to you.
Thanks so much, Nick. And just let me know if you can see my slides.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to be talking to you today about a bit of a snapshot across a number of different projects that we've been working on in Western Australia to support food security and healthy food access. The first one I'm going to talk about is a project that we were working on as a consultancy piece for the National Heart Foundation, and they had their award-winning Healthy Active by Design project. But they didn't have a healthy food aspect of their website. So they were looking at planning considerations for built environment professionals such as town planners, urban designers, local government, and so on. But there wasn't a really dedicated section for food and considering food access. So what we worked on was trying to collate evidence around the importance of creating healthy towns and communities, be it new or retrofitting existing towns and communities with opportunities to access food, healthy food for everyone. So there's an evidence summary. There's also case studies from local, national, and also around the world in terms of how different towns and communities have created more opportunities for equitable access to healthy food. There's also an advocacy prompter that is used for questions just to prompt considerations of these types of planning considerations to include health, but across different sectors too. So looking at buildings, looking at town squares, so all the opportunities that you can to fit in access to healthy food, be it through the community food environment and physical outlets or community food growing opportunities, for example. There's also policies from around Australia. So we've got state by state based policies, as well as international examples of some great work that's happening all around the world to support healthy food access. So really this is looking at resourcing professionals and really thinking outside of the typical health professionals, looking at other people that might be involved with planning for healthy towns. The second project I'll talk about is probably one of the bigger projects that I've been involved with over the last 2.5 years. And this is our Southwest Food Community Project. So this is all about connecting government and community to progress food security action. So this is happening in our Southwest region, which is tucked into the southwest corner of WA. And it's about 23,000 square kilometres. So while it's a smaller region in WA, it's still quite large. And what we were doing was we adopted an approach designed by the organisation Wicked Lab. And it's all around trying to support system change to a better way of working to address a complex problem. So we used a systemic innovation lab approach, which is a 6-stage process where the first stage is about forming your core team, having a community launch where you bring together people within the community, be it government, community organisations and residents, to really look at, well, what is the issue we're trying to address? What's the current state of play in our region? And in our case, we're looking at food security. So we're trying to think of all the different programs and initiatives that are operating that address one or more of the determinants of food security, and really thinking about, well, where do we want to get to? What do we want that to look like here in our region? The second stage was explore. So this is where we actually interviewed people that were leading 52 different initiatives in the region. So this was a pilot project, mind you. So 52 initiatives was still quite a lot to really interview, to unpack what they were doing, who they were working with to get their work done. And then we evaluated what they were doing against 36 characteristics for system change. So those characteristics are looking at how we can shift to that better way of working to address a complex problem. And you can see here, I know you can't see it in detail, but this is a partnership network analysis. So we could really see who was working with whom, who's right in there in the mix, working with lots of different organisations and collaborating, and then perhaps who's more an outlier, so we could really connect them in and try to get them working or supporting them to work more in collaboration with others. And then the third stage was maps. This is where we took all of that data on the system change characteristics that these initiatives possessed, and then we put that into an online mapping tool. And I'll show you the map in just a moment. So that really gives us that system of initiatives or a portfolio of interventions. The stage 4, which was learn, enabled us to really unpack what that system was telling us. So where were people possessing system change characteristics, and where were there windows of opportunity for us to help work with them to enhance the great work that they were already doing. And I should say, just examples of the types of initiatives that were included were things like social enterprise, local government plans and policies looking at food access. There might have been food literacy programs, there might have been farmers markets and so on. And then the 5th stage, which was addressed, was where we brought people back together again. So we had a number of forums to really keep connecting the network and keep helping to increase the opportunities to connect and network between them. So this is where we wrote individual project reports for each initiative owner so that they could see which system change characteristics they reportedly possessed and which ones that they were potentially looking at how they could enhance what they were doing to then possess down the track. So they created their own action plans. So it was a really co-designed process where we did small group workshops where they put down some actions that they wanted to do and pick up over the next 6 months to enhance the work that they were doing. And we also brainstormed some new initiatives potentially to fill gaps that we did a scoping of what was really out there and operating in the region, but what was still missing and what did we need to look at increasing and actually filling gaps in with new particular initiatives. The 6th stage was looking at shares. So this is about getting information spread throughout this system. People said that they wanted to know who was doing what, they wanted to know where they were operating, they wanted more information about food security and how they could really contribute to that bigger picture. So this is where we got some extra funding to build a purpose-built platform called Food Community. So it's got a map of pin drops of where different programs are operating. There's different case studies highlighting the great work that people are doing to tell stories. There's infographics, webinars, there's an advocacy training course to really help people get the community groups to get their messages up into government. So overall, this is a process which is a coordinated approach to collaboration and also system change. This is our map, the system change tracking of the portfolio of initiatives. And down the y-axis are the 52 different food security initiatives. And across the bottom here, you can see that, I know you can't read them, but there's 36 system change characteristics. They're actually embedded within 9 different focus areas. So it's all about shaking up the current way of working, moving to a new and better way of working. And then the later stages are all around connecting government with community. So how can we really get the messages and knowledge shared between government and community organisations? And of course, you can see there's lots of white space, which means that there's lots of windows of opportunity here for people to work on. We then conducted a follow-up evaluation 6 months after the action planning to see sort of what changes people had actually made. And those black squares around those tiles are the actual system change characteristics that have now been possessed or taken up by these initiatives based on the actions that they've undertaken. So we observed 25 changes to practice across this system. We also captured barriers and enablers to change in practice. So things like looking at government restrictions in terms of creating new initiatives or changing the initiatives that they had. It might have been time, it could have been a lack of resources, but then enablers such as funding or community participation were real keys to success for these people. And we also measure the project impact. So people said that this process really helped them to focus on these specific areas of change and enhancing the work that they were doing. It helped them to understand food security better and their role in that bigger picture of a system. They weren't doing it alone. There was a system of initiatives also operating, and it really also helped them to network and collaborate with others. The third project I'll talk about is a pathway to healthy food environments. So this is a pilot project that we're looking at piloting in 4 local governments in Western Australia at the moment. So again, this project's been going for a couple of years now, and it's been adapted from the Victoria's Healthy Food Connect model. So we've put the guide as an online tool. So what it includes is where local government looks at a local community food profile. So they pull in data, local data around the health of the natural built economic and socio-cultural environments to help them really examine what they've already got in their local government area to support healthy food access across these different domains. And then with that data, through that needs assessment, they're conducting or creating a local food action plan. And so they're really trying to get that local food action plan up through their council to really embed healthy food access into their government plans and really making it part of core business. And we have seen, even though the local governments are still tracking through the process now, one of them's taking their plan, they've developed their plan, the draft plan, and they're taking that through their council, hopefully next month. So this particular platform, the Local Food Environments platform, is still really for those local governments, but we are hoping to scale up this project to other local governments within WA in future years once we've refined the process. The last project I'll talk about is a project we've been working on this year. So this is looking at COVID-19 and Southwest food supply. So again, we're taking a region-based look at this particular issue because we've found that to get more depth, we really need to focus on that region and to try to build capacity within that region. So the first phase was a consumer survey where we asked members of the public via an online survey what types of impacts they've seen COVID-19 have on their food supply, but also their purchasing and consumption behaviours as well, and food waste and things like that. We also included the USDA food security survey module. So we were looking at measuring food insecurity amongst the respondents there too. We asked them for innovations they might have seen within the pandemic in terms of food businesses and what they've done. And we also asked them strategies that they would suggest to increase the resiliency of our food supply here in the region. The second phase was we were interviewing food supply stakeholders. So people across different parts of the food supply chain, which you can see here. And that gave us a really great diversity in perspectives of how the pandemic has impacted our food supply here. We asked them what the food supply or food supply chain options were used before COVID, what they were like during COVID, what the impact's been, what things make it harder or easier for us to access local food or have those shorter food supply chains within our own region. And similarly, we asked them for innovations they might have seen across food businesses, and similarly, strategies to increase the resiliency of our food supply after the pandemic. So collectively, with the consumer survey and those interviews, we developed a series of draft recommendations, which we then took to a public forum a couple of weeks ago to workshop with attendees to see whether we were looking at something that was going to be effective in the longer term and what we could possess or what we could actually progress soon, and looking at what is more of a longer term action that we need to work towards. So these are the recommendations that collectively came from those three phases. So people were talking about boosting collaboration and relationships between food supply stakeholders and consumers. So they really wanted to get knowledge sharing across different platforms to really help people collaborate in these times of crisis, but also afterwards. So really trying to increase that knowledge dissemination across those stakeholders. It was also about trying to collaborate to offer dignified food relief where possible. So working to ensure that everyone has access to affordable, nutritious food in a dignified way. There was a recommendation around cultivating authentic local opportunities for direct food sales. So examples there were trying to reduce the red tape that might have been associated with local or small scale farmers trying to sell their produce more locally. So making sure we've got more opportunities for the regional grown food to be available in our region. Distribute food differently was talked about in the context of the fact that often in Western Australia, we have a lot of food coming through Perth, the Perth metropolitan area, which is, it might have included food grown in regions in Western Australia, coming down to Perth and then getting redistributed to those very regions that it was grown in. So it's really inefficient and centralised. So there was a lot of discussion around the fact that we want some more region-based infrastructure to help those local food systems thrive.
Steph, I'm just conscious of time. Maybe do you want to make time for the breakout rooms?
Yep.
Are you able to quickly summarise the remaining recommendations, and then we can
Absolutely. Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely. This is my last slide. So yeah, educating consumers was really important. Planning for future food system disruptions by communicating across different networks and making institutions have opportunities to get people fed, and then really collaborating together to create those emergency responses that include food. So really prioritising that rather than an ad hoc response. We are looking at scaling up our Southwest Food Community Project to other regions. We're looking at refining that local government's pathway to then approach other regions to potentially get involved as well. And then we're looking at promoting and taking forth these recommendations to see what's achievable. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Steph. And yeah, like again, like Mel, amazing amount of work that you've been doing over there, and great depth and detail. People are really interested in the data and the way you've been able to track the systems change and through those initiatives. And great to see the linkages across the country between Victoria and WA as well. So we're going to give maybe about sort of like 7 minutes now for some questions. I know that Sarah's already dealt with a few of the questions that were put to her, but I'm going to hand over to George and Ariana to pick up a few of the other questions that perhaps were for Mel or Steph, or ones for Sarah that haven't been answered. George.
Sure. So I have a
Ariana.
question here from Linda. So for Sarah, has there been any assessments of the effect of Act 143's implementation, both with the establishment of new farm businesses and any feedback from municipal authorities?
Yeah, so there has been ongoing conversations about how it's going. Jake has actually been our point person on that, so I'm sorry he's not here to give you a more detailed answer to that question. It is going well for a lot of types of on-farm enterprises. The one place where there was pushback from municipal authorities, even when the legislation was being created, was specifically about weddings. Weddings ended up being very much a sticking point for whether that was valuable, whether that should be considered under the statute as an on-farm accessory business or not. And the other place where there is still sticking points is the legislation is set up so whether it's considered accessory or not sort of depends which part of the operation makes more money. And some of these other businesses produce so much more revenue, especially if it's a bad year for the farm, that there is some concern about, you know, if you have a single really large, really profitable wedding, or even just really good sales through other agritourism activities, does that accidentally bump you over the line where that's not really the accessory business? So that is still something that needs to be worked on.
Great, thank you. And another question for Sarah again from Karen. She's interested to know how the Food as Medicine program works and connections with the health service. For example, do patients get coupons for food, etc.?
Yeah, so I put a link into the chat for a document that I didn't mention on my presentation that we had done previously, looking at a variety of different food as medicine programs throughout Vermont. And so this was sort of one of the preliminary documents our health team put together in preparing to address this through the state health improvement plan. So it's not comprehensive, but it's more looking at a sample of different programs. So that might be of interest. And then there also were at least 2 and possibly more prescription CSA programs funded through this past summer's local food in your community grant program. And those profiles are up on the Food Resilience website and gives a little bit more detail about how the grant program supported that work.
Great. And another one for you is from Peter, and he's asking, what role could primary health networks play in an improved food system?
Yeah, so I don't know if this is the whole answer, but one thing I just almost mentioned during my presentation is that one of our main healthcare partners is called the Bi-State Primary Care Association, which is the nonprofit that supports the network of federally funded primary care practitioners in the state, which I assume is comparable to what you're talking about in your context. And they actually have been key partners in getting Food as Medicine part of the state health improvement plan. They've been doing a lot of the convening and the work around that conversation. And the other piece that's really exciting to me is that we don't know for sure if this will happen yet because they haven't secured funding yet, but the Bi-State Primary Care Association is actually pursuing grant funding to do strategic food as medicine planning. And if they get this next grant opportunity that they've applied for, a portion of that is earmarked for Farm to Plate to actually look at specifically the transportation to food access as a challenge and create resources for the primary care members on how to work on transportation to food access in their community. So that was a really exciting partnership to see the Bi-State Primary Care Association come to us with an interest in engaging around transportation as strategic goal.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. And I think maybe we have time for 1 or 2 more. So I have a question for Steph regarding ECU. So Karen notes that system sounds brilliant and she wants to know, or I guess Mel, you could hop in here as well. Is there anything similar in Victoria? She has spent months investigating and networking with initiatives, so it would be really useful to know if there's similar work in the Vic region regarding ECU's work.
In terms of the Systemic Innovation Lab approach, I'm guessing?
Yeah.
Really sure. I know that there has been some work done in South Australia, but I'm not familiar with the same sort of approach being done in Victoria. But I know that there is another, I think, a state-based model of systemic change that's being used. I think Mel might be able to speak to possibly a little bit further.
I'm not 100% sure, actually, Steph. That's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of alliances and networks that are working across the state. A lot of them are locally based. There's a lot of local alliances and a lot of support happening on the ground level. There's not sort of an overarching food policy network style alliance or group in Victoria. I mean, I think our COVID working group was perhaps a little bit of an attempt to pull one together in terms of linking out to a lot of the groups working on the ground. We also do have some structures such as the state government's V, which is the Victorian Healthy Eating Enterprise, which does provide a lot of capacity building and support across the state around food systems and food access. Yeah, that's probably the closest thing I can think of.
Great, thank you. Nick, did you want to go on more? Did you want to wrap up?
Yeah, maybe we could have one more question. I just want to quickly point out also that in terms of data and monitoring, one of the big gaps that a lot of people here are well aware of is the lack of a really in-depth food security monitoring and survey approach, contrasting with the United States, where there's a fairly deep understanding of levels of food insecurity. Here in Australia, our monitoring of that has been I think limited, and perhaps Vic Health have drilled into that in a bit more depth and detail during COVID, but I think that's a key data point that needs to guide policy going forward. But maybe time for one more question, Ariana.
Sure. So going back to Sarah, Evan would like to know if there have been any challenges with land use or statutory planning frameworks that determine where farms can be located, and how have you navigated this?
Yeah, so the all of our statutory frameworks basically exempt agriculture. So the Act 250 development regulations does exempt ag. It won't ever need a permit, and therefore there's also no teeth in the regional or municipal plan to address that. One interesting case that it has been an issue, very similar to what I said about the Act 143 on-farm businesses, is that there have been some issues arising with farms that also do composting, on-farm composting with food scraps from the community. And there's been regulatory disagreement about whether that portion of the business counts as agriculture or not. And again, depending on the exact revenue streams, it may or may not trigger Act 250. So yeah, so that's a piece that our food cycle and nutrient management community in Vermont has been trying to work through. But other than that, there's not really any effect on agriculture.
Okay, thanks everyone, and thanks Ariana. So what we're going to do now, because of the great depth of expertise and knowledge that's in the room, we really wanted you all to have a chance to speak to each other, and particularly to strengthen your connections at a regional and state level. So we've created 6 breakout rooms that we're all going to send you off to now. So WA, South Australia, Tasmania, New South Wales, and 2 in Victoria, Metro and Regional. These rooms are going to go for 35 minutes, and we'll give you a 5-minute and 2-minute time warning for wrapping up the discussion and returning to a final plenary, where the facilitator from each room will share what has been discussed. All the breakout rooms are going to be recorded separately, and we will share the recordings with everyone attending today, as well as the plenary presentations that you just heard. So there's 2 topics that we'd invite you to explore in these breakout rooms. First of all, what 1 or 2 high priority initiatives to strengthen the state or regional food systems can the organisations represented here and others who aren't here today collaborate on? And secondly, given that in 2021, the United Nations is for the very first time hosting a global food systems summit, can 1 or more of the organisations represented here and or others help today commit to helping to facilitate 1 or more food systems summit?
Hi everyone, are you with me in the plenary? I haven't assigned you because I don't know which room you'd like to be in. So if you want to tell me which room you're interested in joining, that would be great.
Thanks, Ariana. Sorry, I missed the first 10 minutes because I was teaching at the time. So
That's okay.
I'm actually regional. So it's Gabrielle Francis here from LCHS. So I'm Vic Regional.
I will put you in there right now.
Thanks so much.
Regional. I'm not sure how to send you there. Give me 1 minute.
That's okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. No worries.
There we go. Put you in Vic Regional. Hi, Bonnie. Is there a room that you'd like to go into? Hi, Sarah. Are you able to hear me? Hi, we're currently in breakout sessions. Are you able to hear me? Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for the last few people to join us. Should be another minute.
Right, is everyone back?
Yes, everyone should be here now.
Okay.
We were the last
Okay.
one.
Okay, I have. Great. Okay, all right. Well, look, we've only got 10, maybe with your indulgence, perhaps 15 minutes. So it would be really fantastic. Yes, I know, Karen. Yeah, we need longer. But this was the idea of like starting these conversations, and hopefully, you know, whether through it's the framework of the Food System Summit dialogue process, or things that are related to that, to continue them. So today is, you know, hopefully sort of like building, you know, some foundations and relationships and ideas to take forward beyond this space. So with that in mind, let's go around to the various facilitators from the various rooms and hear what was discussed and what people have been talking about. So shall we start with Tasmania? Who's going to tell us about Tasmania?
Hi, my name is Catherine. I work for the University of Tasmania, and I'm speaking on behalf of Catherine Kent, who is an academic here from the Rural Centre for Health, and Vishnu Prahalad, who is an academic from Environmental Management, and Catherine Fisher, who presented as part of a student group Masters of Social Work. And I think we agree with the comments that we slightly ran out of time, but that it was a great opportunity for us to get together, and hopefully we can continue with a Tasmanian focused breakout room. We talked about developing a local food strategy for Tasmania, and I think that that is already in the works. And there was quite a bit of interest in the research that Catherine Kent has presented based on the 2 surveys that Catherine and Sandy have done during and following the COVID lockdown. Yeah, so looking forward to the next steps.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Did anyone else from that breakout room want to add anything? Great. Okay. Thanks very much, Catherine. Over to WA, who is telling us what's happened in WA. Oh,
That'd be me.
sorry.
Oh yeah,
Leah,
you go, Liz. No, you go,
Leah.
you go. Liz can.
We're champing at the bit. So we've obviously got a bit of energy over here in WA. It's still early. We've coffee's kicking in. So my name's Liz, and my family farms 2 hours northeast of Perth. So I'm involved in a number of different food systems stuff. On a regen ag board, work in regional development, and manage an ag research program in Papua New Guinea. So the kinds of things that our group discussed today, we had 2 kind of presentations by Perth NRM around the WA food security plan that is currently being developed. And we also had a presentation by Catherine McDoodle around the 5,000 meals program. So WA's food security plan still very in early stages, but kind of looking at whole of system approach, and especially around productive capacity of the land in which we farm and whatnot in WA. And then so understanding yes, I'll touch on, is really working to provide meals for people in Western Australia using wastage and whatnot, and working with students to do so. A couple of other themes that we touched on was the importance of communication and understanding, a bit to Steph's presentation around understanding who's playing in this space and the importance of communication across industry, but also how that builds, how trust is so important. We spoke about the evolution of different projects. Another one here in West Australia is a sub-regional local ball store that's been developed, and how important that working with producers to build trust along the way, and like the evolution of that project has come about. There was also mention around, I guess, the coronavirus, the pandemic rather, doing a number of different things, really being a catalyst for these kind of crunchy conversations that are otherwise sometimes put to the wayside as not important, and food security being really, important part of how our society functions, but often is kind of put to the wayside. So this is kind of brought to the fore, this conversation. And also the other thing is that it has forced government's hand to a certain extent to collaborate much more effectively. And then finally, I guess where we landed was a great point made about defining food security. It's quite complex and quite contextual, and everyone has a lens by which we look through food security quite differently. So to create opportunities to really nut out some of these wicked problems, we need to acknowledge that it is quite different and contextual. Where we landed at the end of the conversation was, is it time for state, for WA to have our lead movers and shakers and progressive thinkers to come together to kind of start to unpack these, because there's great things happening. For example, Steph's projects in the Southwest and the WA State Food Security Plan, but perhaps there's more opportunity for us to come together more collaboratively. Rapid fire, that's it from me.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Liz. That was fantastic. Sounds like a really great discussion. Okay, let's go to New South Wales.
Yes, thanks a lot, Nick. I'm Berbel France. I'm a health promotion officer at Healthy Cities Illawarra in food sustainability and food security, and also the coordinator of Food Fairness Illawarra. In the New South Wales breakout room, we had the pleasure of hearing from City of Sydney Councillor Jess Miller and her mission to regreening and depaving Sydney, followed by Karen Charlton and Amy Carrot, who spoke about from the University of Wollongong, who spoke about their ARC food governance project. The discussion, while very short, mostly highlighted the role of local government in regards to getting food systems as a priority on the agenda, and sort of the limitations with the upper house not endorsing it as a priority. And how for the local governments to kind of play a role within that. And it really requires sort of internal advocates to get it on the agenda, which was highlighted by Amy and Karen's work, where the ARC research project highlighted a number of local governments that actually do a lot of work around food security and have embedded a lot of policies around food security and food access, while other councils actually haven't. So, I guess another question that did come up is, as the New South Wales inquiry in food security and food resilience is coming up, what is the role of local regional networks or other organizations in that inquiry? Is there a chance for us to kind of help? We didn't fully nut it out, I have to admit. We then also spoke about the importance of Karen and Amy's work around highlighting all the different local community plans and which ones have endorsed local food security and access and how they've done it, and to actually make a database available for people to review the really good plans and the really good policies that work, so that other local governments could potentially easily adopt them, if not for local organizations or advocacy groups to actually highlight these to-day local government to kind of get it on the agenda as well. So it's sort of a two-way approach that we kind of were talking about. We definitely had not enough time. I would have loved to continue chatting, because I'm sure we would have come up with a lot more. Is there anything else that that anyone out of New South Wales would like to add to that? That's it.
Looks like you've covered it, Birbal, and thank you very much. And yeah, well, I guess that's the invitation now is for you to, you know, organise yourselves and have another conversation that you've commenced it. Let's go to Regional Victoria, who is telling us what the conversation was from Regional Vic.
Yeah, it's over to me. Thanks, Nick. So, for those who don't know me, I'm Matt Curlin, and I'm from the City of Greater Bendigo. We're fortunate enough to have Miles Gaffney talk to us about the salad project from AgVic, and that was really looking around strategic agricultural land and land use change. So that include looking at, I guess, an understanding of what land use changes have happened over the past 17 years, the drivers and the consequences of land use change, and then leading towards a proposed strategic agricultural decision framework, which could be rolled out by local government planners to make decisions for particular parcels of land. One of the interesting things that came out of that, what I was probably surprised about, was that agricultural land across the state hasn't changed in the past 20 years as a whole. But then once you drill down to certain regions, it has changed quite dramatically, both positive and negative. Chanel Ralph, also from the City of Greater Bendigo, spoke about our food system strategy, and I guess some of the key things from this for us is really around that it's a multi-stakeholder strategy. It's not just us, the city, who has actions with it, but we've actually got over 30 partners committed to delivering actions against this strategy. It takes a collective impact approach and also has guiding principles and 4 key objectives that will drive our work in the space for the next 10 years. So we know that the food system will change pretty dramatically in the next 10 years, and that this work is going to give us that guiding background to how we deliver it. In the discussion questions, Jen Oldham kind of built on that. She's our mayor. We're very lucky to have both here today and as our mayor for the city. And she highlighted that some of our City of Gastronomy work and how just the great links between City of Gastronomy work, the food systems work and the agribusiness work, and how it's all starting to come together in the City of Greater Bendigo now, which is really exciting. Miles spoke more around how supply chains are a huge challenge for AgVic, and it's a priority for them and one of their key pillars of work going forward. And their agriculture strategy has been released shortly, and that will just detail the key pillars of the state's focus for the coming years. So really looking forward to seeing that and what else is in that. And probably the only other thing I'll add is the question was posed as, does AgVic have a way of thinking to enable a nuanced approach to different parts of the state? Because we know we've got urban, peri-urban and rural and regional areas. And to paraphrase Miles, it's not as nuanced as it could be.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Matt, for that summary. Again, it sounds like a really great and rich discussion. And thank you to everyone who participated and presented in that breakout room. Let's go over to South Australia, to Adelaide, and I think Christy.
Yes, hi, Christy Spire from Green Adelaide, and also facilitator of the SA Urban Food Network, which is supported by Green Adelaide, but an outside of government organisation, evolving. So yeah, in our breakout room, we had Dr. Sue Booth, who's been doing research around food security, amongst other things, and about to do a session for us later next year around food democracy. And we also had Liz Saunders from the Food Embassy and Sue McGann, who is working down south with the Onkaparinga Food Security Collaborative. not collective. Yeah, and just had a really open conversation around a number of things, looking at the possibility of the impetus around perhaps joining the Milan Food Policy Pact, and how to get the agenda up higher onto local governments' radars here. So a couple of local governments here are working towards food system and community plans, but as a whole, it hasn't been adopted. So a lot of the work that we've been looking at across with a lot of local governments here, with support from Nick and some visitors from Victoria last year, is how to really educate local councillors and mayors and staff about how this can fit. And today's conversation was really relevant around that integrated approach into existing plans. So that's really interesting. And then we started talking around some more circular economy initiative ideas to collaborate around, from the market to also food relief for people from the farmers markets here, there's a great collection of really strong farmers markets and some really good community initiatives around all of those that have gotten stronger during the COVID response as well. And then just tried to look at some of those things that we could collaborate around with further. Michelle's also returned to South Australia, a researcher as well. So looking at what are some other research that could help us to get some of those baselines to help people work together. And what else was there? Oh yes, and just wanted to flag that Nick flagged with us around the UN's food systems summit, and looking at some conversations around that. So as a broad network of people, looking at how we can create some more conversations and make sure, as I'm sure all of you do in your work, is how to get those diverse players from across the food system together in the room, so that we're being as integrated and collaborative across this complex space as we can. So happy to keep working across the states and nationally to keep this on the radar and try and get some more people from South Australia into these types of rooms. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Christy. And finally, let's hear from Vic Metro, who's reporting back from there.
Thanks, Nick. So yes, hi everyone. I'm Jane Potter from Vic Health. I'm the Healthy Eating Principal Program Officer there, and leading some of the work on the consensus statement Nick and Mel spoke of earlier. So we had a great session. Again, like everyone else, probably didn't even touch the sides, but we had Linda Martin present from Planet Rural on an audit they have been doing in a lit review that they've just recently undertaken, which we're looking to. And apologies for the noise, I've got some building work going on in the background, as always seems to happen when I speak. I guess one of the things that will be interesting to see coming out of that work is just that there is a movement of those smaller scale regenerative ag farmers who obviously burdened by the sort of regulatory frameworks and some of that disconnect between the broader supportive planning frameworks make it increasingly difficult for those smaller scale producers. And we then had a fantastic presentation from Yogi Bijou from the city of Casey, talking about their urban design framework, which Yogi actually works for one of the urban growth councils in metropolitan Melbourne that has undergone, I think the urban growth boundary has changed, Yogi, correct me if I'm wrong, but 4 times in 10 years, is that right?
Yep, that's right.
So pushing out into our rich agricultural land, we have some fantastic asparagus growing regions and other areas which are increasingly being lost to housing, as many of our metropolitan cities are facing. So fantastic urban growth, urban design framework, which is seeking to restore the ecology and protect agricultural land in that area. So I guess we looked at some of the opportunities in Victoria. We don't currently have any legislation that protects our farmland, but there is a planning consultation and submission on the planning for Melbourne's green wedge and agricultural land happening now. So we felt that this is a terrific opportunity. Sorry again, everybody, for your eardrums. A terrific opportunity for us to collectively respond. And as Mel talked earlier around the consensus statement, that already advances us to a great position in terms of having a collective response and strengthens that. The other issue which is raised, and a perennial one for us in Victoria, as it is across many jurisdictions across the world, is that we do not have a sort of whole of garden cross-government food strategy, and that's something that, you know, in the absence of any oversight, means we have a lot of duplicated effort and lends itself for, you know, duplication and lack of coordination. So that's something that, again, the consensus statement and other efforts of the working group and those in Victoria are working hard to support that change. So we're just excited to have met everybody in a small group and look forward to further discussions. So thank you to Sustain and to the Vermont team for the opportunity.
Great, thanks so much, Jane. And I just want to extend a great thank you to everybody who participated in these breakout rooms, to the presenters, to the facilitators, to the note takers. We will do our best to capture everything and share with you, you know, what's just been presented, as well as the recordings. All of these have been recorded, so we'll share that with you as well as a resource. And just by way of conclusion, just like to again extend my deep appreciation and thanks to Sarah, to Mel and to Steph for presenting in plenary, to my colleagues Ariana and Georgia for all the very hard work in bringing all this together, to everybody who supported it, these webinars, the more than 20, I think, different partners and organisations across the country. We hope it's been a really insightful and inspiring morning, and please join us again at the same time next week, where we'll conclude this webinar series looking at the role of public sector procurement and again lessons from Vermont and also Northeast Victoria. We're just confirming the participation of the Farm to Institution New England organisation that's been doing work across the 6 states of the New England region of the United States, and they'll be sharing some of the lessons that they've achieved in influencing food system change through that mechanism. So thank you all once again. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful rest of the week, and look forward to seeing you all again next Wednesday. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.